Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking ACK for inviting me to do this talk, apologizing for not being able to do it in Japanese, and thanking Obayashi-san for agreeing to do it in English. I thought, by way of framing it, I'd begin with a little bit of the history of ArtReview, which is a magazine that was founded in London in 1949 by a married couple. One was a collector, the other was an artist. And after 1 year of it going, the artist and the collector got divorced. The artist ran away to the other side of the world in Australia, and we like to speculate that perhaps that's because she didn't like criticism. But I think, Obayashi-san, you've had a really long relationship, an enduring relationship with artists, unlike ArtReview's founder. And I wanted to begin by asking you how your collection started and how your passion for art developed.
Kind of noisy, yeah? Well, thank you for being here with me. I'm Obayashi. I'm a chairman of Obayashi Corporation Construction Company. But also, I started collecting contemporary art 4 years ago. Before that, I used to collect the architecture drawings. Then I joined.
Do you still collect them?
Yeah. And I joined the MoMA International Council, and after Tate International Council, and everybody asked me, "What do you collect, Takeo? What do you collect, Takeo?" So I first, explained that yes, I'm collecting architecture drawings and other things, but I found more people interested in Japanese contemporary art. So I thought maybe I'm responsible to introduce Japanese contemporary art to those international collectors. But also at the same time, I was involved in building art project in our new headquarters. That is 18 site-specific commission artists to do the art walls or interior for the meeting rooms. Actually, I worked with Yayoi Kusama, Ettore Spalletti, Daniel Biran, Giulio Paolini, those global artists. And then I was very much impressed with those artists, but moreover, I was very touched I could meet those artists. So for me, still now, meeting artists is very important. It's a base of my collection. So that's how I started collecting contemporary art.
But I guess at some point you must have bought a work without meeting the artist. So does the relationship start by you collecting the work, or do you need to meet the artist before you collect the work?
It's both, actually. I said I feel I'm responsible to introduce Japanese artists to global collectors. Then at the same time, I joined the MoMA International Council, and I started going to galleries, and the galleries tend to introduce the artist. So luckily, I had a chance to meet those artists, and then after I acquire pieces, or sometimes I find good works and buy pieces, and then I ask the gallerist or a studio to introduce the artist himself or herself.
And does it ever happen that you like the work, but when you meet the artist, you don't like the artist? And does that change anything about the work?
Unfortunately, it never happened, actually. So somehow all artists are very, very, very nice, very unique. But I didn't have any, chances or opportunities. I really didn't like the works because, I didn't like the artist.
I wanted to ask a little bit, you talked about introducing Japanese art to international audiences. How does that work more precisely?
So later, 2006, I built the viewing space for my collection. I asked Tadao Ando to design a house, and then I show my collection there. And so I try to show the both international artists and Japanese artists. So people come to my house to see Ando's architecture or maybe Olafai license commission work, but also they can see Japanese artists, the collection. Or maybe people come to my house to see Hiroshi Sugimoto, but they find some other young international artists. So try to keep the balance between international artists and Japanese artists. So as my collection.
And do you think today it's still the case that Japanese artists need introductions to the international scene, or has it changed over the past 2 decades?
I always encourage Japanese galleries to introduce capable Japanese artists to abroad, because it's very important. And if they are introduced globally, it's good for them, and also it's good for collectors. So. Like Miwa-san is there. She's my favorite artist, and she's one of the 100 artists in Aichi Triennale. But now she's having a show at the Sky the Bath House in Tokyo. But she should be the one to introduce, globally.
But do you think that Japanese art is in some way different? Does it need more explaining than about the context and?
What do you think?
Me, no, not particularly. But I think also context remains important. So I think ArtReview has an Asia-based magazine because the context it's a big place, but many of the contexts are different and customs are different and the language is also different. And I guess we appreciate to some degree that those contexts need a form of translating. For the work to be understood as it was originally intended.
I think it's really the matter of the opportunities. So if they have more opportunities to be introduced, widely, naturally global collectors will find the good Japanese artists. Actually, there are a few, but great collectors who collect the Japanese contemporary art. So they come to Japan and visit Japanese galleries. But for most of other collectors, Japanese artists are very, very new because not many global, especially mega galleries, introduce Japanese artists. But there are so many capable, great Japanese artists in Japan. So this kind of art fair is really, really good opportunity because many global galleries come to Kyoto, work together with the Japanese galleries and introduce their artists, but also Japanese artists, and they find the other Japanese artists. So it's a good opportunity for them to know it.
No, it's amazing seeing the fair as a form of international network and web of connections that I think, as you say, is something that's really important. But at the same time, I was wondering, do you think the reason international galleries have been perhaps slow to represent Japanese artists is because the galleries are lazy, or?
I don't think so, but I think it's also because of Japanese art market is because Japanese collectors are more interested in Japanese artists who are already popular in Japan. They are interested in the names, but they should they should open their eyes to the artworks, not the names.
And you talked earlier about putting art into the company headquarters. How did the staff feel about that? Did it change anything for them? Were they more relaxed and comfortable or more curious?
Yes, actually, I haven't really forced our employee to learn about art or to like the artworks, but more like naturally I want them to see artworks naturally, and because the art. It depends on the person which artwork he or she likes. So I don't really force them to like it or to watch them, but because those artworks are there, they watch those pieces every day. So I hope they have some familiar sense to the contemporary art.
I mean, which I think is important to kind of engage the public in conversation with it as well. I mean, it's very much why Art Review was founded in the first place in the wake of the Second World War, which was to argue that contemporary art could play a role in shaping society, improving communication, and looking forward to a different world, which I think as a magazine we still have to argue for today because no one takes it for granted. But at the same time, you're also involved with Aichi, with the Triennial, and with these other festivals in Japan, which are quite a lot, really. I mean, I was in Okayama last month for that, and there's loads of other festivals going on, and Tokyo Art Week just happened. What role do you think those kind of events have in creating an atmosphere in which contemporary art can thrive?
Well, art fair, I mean, you mean art festival, right? Triennale, Biennale, not the art fair. Yeah, okay. It's very important to know various artists from all over the world, especially global Biennale, Triennale like Yokohama or Aichi, which introduce many global emerging artists or some past artists. So it's a little bit different from the museum, but definitely different from the galleries because the galleries want to sell the works. But Biennale Triennale is under artistic director's concept. They try to introduce as many artists as possible.
And you talked about how the collection's a mix of international artists and Japanese artists. So I worked for a long time in Shanghai, still do actually, but partly in doing a program with the Westbund Art Fair that introduced less well-known international artists in public spaces. And then over the course of time, this project became a bit overly successful so that when international curators would visit Shanghai and would ask to see Chinese artists, it would be really hard to find a single exhibition during the art fair season of any local Chinese artists. How do you think the mix of international artists and Japanese artists works? I mean, in a sense, if market conditions mean that international artists are more saleable, that can be tricky.
I don't think it's a difficult thing. It also depends on how artistic director thinks. But still, I think artistic directors should think about the balance between local artists and global artists. And like Aichi, we had 100 artists, I said. But about 50 from Japan and 50 from international. So I think it works very well, and also I think it's very important to have both. Yeah, for actually domestic visitors especially.
Yeah. I mean, talking of scale, you've said how big Aichi is. How many works do you have in your collection? And can it ever be too big?
That's a top secret.
Well, maybe then just can it ever be too big? Do you have a limit?
No limit. But yeah, you mean
Well, you have to store it. You have to care for it in a way.
Right. About I have my collection in general, right? Is about 1,000 pieces, including architecture drawings, And I have warehouses in three locations. And so the warehouse cost is really serious issue for especially Japanese collectors.
I mean, I think in other contexts, in the US, for example, certain collectors are working with museums to build storage facilities in a shared way to kind of mitigate these costs. Do you think something like that could happen in Japan?
I think so. Yeah. And actually, some collectors are talking about, the building warehouses together, or sometimes maybe warehouse museum to show, not only to store a collection safely, but also to show those collection in a warehouse. And there may be some future solution for storage of the collection.
And is the storage a factor when you're thinking about buying a work, say like a huge Miyajima or something like this? Are you thinking when you buy it, and you've got to think about how to look after it and care for it and store it?
Well, I think the size of the work is really a big matter, and I really care about it because I always think about, where to install or where to locate. But also, sometimes the new museums have big warehouses which don't really have enough collection. So the museums may lease the space for private collectors, or not only the warehouse, but also they may be able to share the exhibition space for private collectors. So we can loan the work to the museum, so museum can exhibit that.
And how important is loaning works for public exhibitions to you?
I'm sorry?
How important is it that the works get seen on loans to public exhibitions?
It's very important because, the artist, I think, want us to show their works in the public. So as far as they want collectors to show their works, in the public museums, definitely I say yes. Yeah.
So as a collector, you have a responsibility not just to the work itself, but to the artist.
To store them and to maintain it and to show them, yes.
And does it give you pleasure to show works in public? Is that part of why you're collecting, is to share the work as well? I mean, you have the building you built with Ando, but also that the works are in circulation in public.
Yeah.
How important is that to you?
The both are very important. I don't have priority, but if I say the museum loan is probably more important. Depends on the museum, though.
What does it depend on with the museum?
Well, sometimes it's logistics and also the museum exhibition itself has some, risk, because the work doesn't get better always. But even though it's in a warehouse, it doesn't get better. So that's why I loan it to museum. Yeah, because if artists want to do that, again, I say yes.
And you've talked already about the fact that the collection is international as well as Japanese artists. And I wonder how you come across the international works. I know you travel a lot for work as well. But is it a process of just wherever you are visiting galleries, or do you go on special trips just for art?
But also their works come to Japan for Biennale, Triennale. But also I travel and I always try to go to museums and galleries wherever I go for business trip. Yeah.
And do you have a particular type of art that you're more attracted to?
Oh, good question.
Or medium?
I don't know. Basically, I acquire whatever I like, and but I like minimal art, but also I like a conceptual art. And the thing is, I said, I like to acquire artworks, of living artists, but also I want to research about the history of the artist. So, for example, I buy like Thomas Druth or Thomas Ruff. I met those people, Andrew Gursky, and then who are Becher's, yeah? And then I acquired Becher's works, and then I'm interested in who influenced Becher's. So I found about Renga Pache might have influenced Bernard and Hila Becher. So studying art history is probably important also for collectors.
So would you say in a way that collecting just encourages more collecting? Because there's always going to be someone who influenced someone else. And it just becomes unending, right? No. And obviously, you've mentioned a number of photographers, and Japan has been famous for photography more than any other discipline in a way for quite some time. Do you have a lot of photography by Japanese artists in the collection as well?
Here Sugimoto, Morimura, Araki, and then Naoya Hatakeyama, many actually, yes.
And what was the first work you bought?
Yes, I don't remember.
Do you still have it?
Yeah, I don't sell my collection, so definitely I do have it. I have to check it.
And where do you see the collection going in the future? Do you see it becoming a foundation, or?
All my friends, ask me, especially artists and some museum people, ask me the same question. Then, what do you do? If something happened to you, what do you do with your collections? So you have to prepare for that. So I think I need to do that. But I hope the collection stays in one place. Maybe hopefully with my name.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it may go to museum, but doesn't have to be a museum. It may go to somebody else's collection. So one room maybe with my name or something like that. Yeah, but I don't know. Yeah, let's think about it together.
You mentioned you began collecting architectural drawings. Do you collect anything else? I think you did stamps.
I used to collect stamps when I was a little kid.
It starts with small things and then it grows.
Yeah, and also we used to have the glass milk bottles.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I used to collect the cap of the milk bottles.
And how much would you like of your life? You run a business on the one hand, but you collect art on the other. How do those things work together?
So
do you sleep?
Fortunately, we have many in-house architects. So architecture is very close to art. And so my father used to say, we are not building buildings, so we are building the city, creating the city. And so we have to be very careful about the culture of the city or artistic side of the city. So it's my business and art is very close. But also in my life, I really enjoy collecting art and showing my collection, and many of my friends and business friends, enjoying visiting my space.
What happens if they don't enjoy it?
They don't come, or they won't come back again.
You mentioned architecture and art and that relationship. You also have in the collection artists like Tokujun Yashioka, who also works in the field of design. How interested are you in these kind of crossover, people who exist between disciplines?
I think crossover is coming more and more. Not only design and architecture, or architecture and art, maybe fashion. So I think it's useless to classify it in a genre, like a fashion or design or art. So it's very important and more and more important to think about the crossover.
But is it about art in particular? Because you introduced this distinction between architecture drawings and art. But what is it about art in particular that captures your imagination?
That's a difficult question. I don't know.
Is it other perspectives or seeing how other people think? Do you have a psychologist's interest in it?
But more like a human things, because many fashion designers and graphic designers or industrial designers are interested in the contemporary art, and not always contemporary artists interested in the high fashion, but
Yeah, quite the opposite. You've said you collect minimal art and conceptual art. Do you like old-fashioned ideas like beauty have anything to do with this?
Like
Beauty.
beauty.
Yeah. Do you have an idea of what's beautiful? Is that important to you?
It's quite important. Yeah. So even though the concept is very interesting in the conceptual art, for me, beauty is very important.
And what is beautiful to you?
Yes, I knew that's coming. It's definition is different for everybody. So you can't really say in the words, but what I think the beauty is a beauty.
Yeah. So self-defined.
Yeah.
Beauty.
Definitely.
And do you think if someone walks through your collection, they will get an idea of what you think of as beauty?
I don't know, but they usually say this is very much like Mr. Obayashi. Yeah, so even though they don't know about me well, but they still say that. So showing character is very important for collection, I think.
And do you think someone walking around the collection will get a great idea of who you are? Because it seems like you and the collection can't be separated in some ways.
I'm sorry.
So someone looking at the collection would understand, Obayashi-san from looking at the collection would understand certain things about you by looking just at the collection.
Yeah. Well, usually people can feel it, yeah? And I want them to feel it, yeah.
And who's your favorite artist? You mentioned one already.
No, I didn't. Well, yes, but many actually, many. I can't really name one or two.
Does it depend who's standing next to you?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I never regrets about my acquisition.
And what happens sometimes, we all know from the art world, acquisitions can be a difficult process. How far are you prepared to go to negotiate for what you want? Do you ever have problems? If there's something that gets away or that you wanted that you can't have?
It's a time issue and a budget issue, but basically it's whether you are lucky or not.
Yeah.
Opportunities.
And is it different for you working with international galleries compared to Japanese galleries?
I don't think so. Yeah, basically galleries are galleries, dealers are dealers.
Yeah? All over the world?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And you think, we talked a little about this earlier, do you think that's true of artists too? That they're all the same? Or?
I think so.
But even though they produce work that comes out of different contexts, with different motivations and different formats?
I think so. Yeah. But they're changing,
Yeah, and how do you keep up with that change? I mean, certainly right now, internationally, there's a sort of turn towards more socially engaged art. And I was this morning with Koki Tanaka, who does that kind of art.
Yeah.
Do you as a collector feel obliged to follow these shifts?
Not quite. Not quite. But maybe in the future, I may like it. I don't know. Nobody can predict about what I like next time.
But when you go to an art fair, can you predict what you're going to buy?
Usually I have something in my mind, but usually I buy something totally different. Yeah.
And so it changes between when you're sent, say, JPEGs and when you see things in real life. And then I wanted to ask, how important is it to see the work in real life?
And also, especially when we go to Basel.
Yeah.
It's galleries such on and on and on and on. There's so many galleries, but good works are very often already pre-sold. So again, it's a matter of the opportunities, whether you can meet, the artworks you want to. But last time in Basel, I acquired the Rodney Graham's painting.
Yeah.
I didn't know about Rodney Graham at that time, but then I just saw it and then, got the explanation, and I was very much impressed, and I bought it. Yeah.
Did you meet him as well?
No, he passed away just, last month, so I didn't have a chance to meet him.
So you do buy works without meeting the artist?
Exactly right. Yeah, it happens. So, but still, if he's still alive, maybe I wanted to meet him.
Yeah. But do you want to meet every artist that you collect, or when it's possible?
Try to, and visit studios. Yeah.
And what is it about meeting them that's different from meeting their work? Does it make it more authentic or more sincere? Or?
No, I just enjoy the conversation. That's all. Doesn't have a deep meaning.
But you've also supported a number of the artists in other ways, with Theaster Gates being an example. How much of your time do you spend, I guess, helping to produce work or enabling the production of work?
You mean me?
Yeah.
How much do I
spend sort of also enabling artists to do things they want to do? So when we met first was with Theaster Gates, who just done this building in Aichi.
Well, I had a long relationship with the Theaster. So before that, we granted Theaster for our foundation to study about the city. So I visited his studio more than a few times. So I built up a relationship with him. So that's why I knew him. So when our artistic director Mami Kataoka appointed him to do the work, it was easy for me to exchange, his ideas and develop something more. Yeah.
So do you think part of the role of a collector is also helping to preserve the career of the artists you collect?
Not necessarily, I think. Yeah, depends on the collector's position. Yeah. Not all of them can do it, I think. I'm just lucky that I just had some opportunities to do that.
Yeah. And how much do you follow, given that part of the talk is about the market, how much do you follow what the market is doing? And how much does that affect what you collect?
I do follow it.
And do you like artists more as their prices rise?
No. Actually, it's a yes and no, because if prices go up, and then probably I won't be able to buy more. But on the other hand, I'm very happy, because maybe I had a good eyes, or
Yeah. And you talked before a little bit about more emerging artists, or artists who are not quite so famous. Where would you go to find those artists? Would it always be galleries, or?
Usually, yes, galleries is the best way to find the emerging artists, because the galleries always take risk to show those emerging artists. It's difficult for all private dealers, to ask, introduction of the emerging artists, but the galleries always have a menu to show emerging artists.
And what have been your, I mean, I'm wondering really how you've discovered a lot of the artists you've collected, the younger ones. Is it always through galleries, or has it been artists recommending other artists?
Usually, let me think about it. Mostly, I think through galleries. Yeah, I think so. At the art fair or at the gallery. But sometimes, like Biennale, Triennale, work very well because they also introduce emerging artists. Yeah.
I'm curious too about, you talked earlier about how some sort of research into art history is important to you as a collector. And I wonder, you didn't study art history before?
No.
So you have an art history that's built up through the collection. And I think this is one of the interesting things about collecting art internationally is you have these different narratives that sometimes come together but sometimes are separate. And I wonder if you think much about that. And because I imagine your art history would be very different from mine, which is formally trained in 18th
So you
century
studied art histories from the 18th centuries?
18th century French sculpture because I liked dead people who didn't answer back. I didn't need the conversation with the artist in order to write about the work.
How is it helping your current career?
I think it makes me aware of the fact that history can be constantly rewritten. There's no fixity to it, and it can be rewritten depending on your perspective. So my family's from Southeast Asia, and they have a very different view on art from my mother's family, and my father's family is European and has a very different perspective on art, a very different story about what art's for, what it's supposed to do. I mean, my grandfather, who was Sri Lankan, didn't think about any of the decorative objects in his home as art. They all had religious functions or memorial functions, but he didn't make a separate category, which is in some ways true in Southeast Asia today. But the art history got me involved with contemporary artists. So I was working with Louise Bourgeois and Sophie Calle while I was a student, essentially for money because I still didn't like artists who taught back. And not really caring about what it was they did, but interested, as you say, in their stories as artists. And then working with one of the situationists, Constant, he made me write about him, even though I didn't write about living people. And then various other publications read it and asked me to do other things. And even though I wasn't really qualified to do them, it was a lot of fun. So again, it was through conversations and discourse.
But do you think, for the ordinary collectors should know about art history, or it helps, the collecting contemporary art?
I don't think it's essential, but I think, as you said, nothing comes out of nothing. And I think all contemporary art, whether it likes to or doesn't like to, references history and references tradition and the context the artist is in. What they think of as art is shaped by whatever museums they saw, or even without visiting museums, about what their families and friends think about as art. And I think that's also one of the ways in which contemporary art can expand so much, as you said, to different disciplines, because everyone's experience is different and everyone's art history. I mean, who you think is important, who I think is important, who the audience think is important, they're always going to be different things. And I think in that sense, it's valuable. And I think it's also valuable when artists are speculating about future situations, which I think increasingly with this turn to art that engages with social issues is important. This sort of art as a sphere of speculation. And I think art history tells you how that can be used or not used. And also teaches us that artists make really bad authority figures. Like Germany, for example, is essentially invented by Goethe and Schiller. And look what happened there when they made that one up. But I think in this way we fabricate society, art is extremely important, and the history of that is also important. Yeah. But are you collecting more and more historical possessions? You said you weren't really at the beginning, and then you kind of said you were. And are there any particular types of historical work that you're interested in?
Well, I didn't say that, but I also collect the antique things. Started from the tea ceremony.
Yeah.
I do the tea ceremony, so calligraphies and scrolls and teacups and containers, whatever. And then I also arranged antique things and contemporary things to my own tea ceremony.
Yeah.
So arranging antique things or historical things with contemporary is fun. So in my space, I also display, the antique furniture, antique things, and contemporary everything. So I really enjoy, coordination.
Yeah. And what do you think that brings to both the contemporary work and the historical work?
I don't know about it, but I think for people who like contemporary art should take a look, the antique things, because it's a part of the history. So I always said to museum curators, the modern contemporary museums should also work together with some contemporary antique things, but also the traditional museum should also work together with contemporary curators to show both. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's an interesting way of thinking, partly because all the stuff that's contemporary now will be antique at some point in the future.
Of course.
And I guess in the history of certainly Western art, but also I think in large parts of Asia, a lot of the public collections were originally part of private collections. And there's a very close relationship, however much we want to separate them.
And we'll be antique in the future. Yeah.
Does it worry you much about how people, or do you think a lot about how people will think about this in 100 years' time or so?
No. Yeah. Yeah. Probably my great grandkids, will say, "Oh, my auntie collected strange thing." Maybe.
And are your kids interested in art as well? Is it a family thing or?
Not really. No. I should do something. Yeah. Yeah.
But they're not at all interested in what you're buying or showing or.
Well, once in a while, yeah. I think, but they think I'm doing something strange.
Does it matter to you what they think? I mean, what other people think?
Not at this moment. But again, for the about when we think about the my collection in the future, maybe I should think about it, and it will be a matter of that. Yeah.
And what might they think is the craziest thing you've bought?
I can't really say that in the public today. Maybe I'll let you know later.
But I guess you talked earlier about the part of being a collector, particularly at the level you're at, is disengagement with public discourse. And what other ways do you think? You have a foundation as well, you mentioned.
Yeah, foundation is to support the study of the cities. Yeah. But not only urban planning, but also we support the study about the city and the history, culture, city and art, and city and science, everything related to cities, because we live in the city.
Yeah.
But there's
all of us.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you think this kind of increasing urbanization has changed the role of art?
That's it. Also yes and no. Yeah. Because everything is changing, society is also changing.
Yeah.
But I don't know how much it affects to the city. Yeah.
But I guess there's a sense in which traditional landscape painting is increasingly about somewhere that's remote from an increasingly urban population.
That's an interesting view.
Well, I think so. I mean, particularly ink painting, for instance.
Interesting. Yeah.
Those are not places that people recognize through experience, but much more so through art. In a way.
But you will probably notice that so many contemporary artists thinking about the city and the background of their concept is really related to the cities or urbanism.
Yeah. And what do you think artists can bring to urbanism?
Well, I'm not really answer to your question, but the reason why I have a program in a foundation to let artists think about the city. That's a theater case was also the one of the artists to propose about the cities he thinks. The artist is always very creative. So to resolve various problems in a city, what's happening right now, I think we need very creative ideas, like artists thing. So.
So you're really dealing with this expanded idea of art.
We need the creative ideas from various artists. Yeah.
I think, talking of expanding the field of art, we should probably expand the field of our discussion as well. So if there are any questions from the audience, if you...
To me or to him?
You can take your pick, but he's more interesting. But if anyone has a question, if you raise a hand,
please,
someone will come by with a microphone. Don't be shy, we're in a bubble of trust.
Yeah, yes.
Thank you very much. Very inspiring discussions. And my question is that back to your discussion about the art history. And the question to the both of you is that what kind of artist, what the qualification or capability of the artist can be the part of art history? And another thing that from the different directions that who makes such an artist to be a part of the art history?
Interesting. Well, I think the reality of certainly British art history is that all the artists who were super popular with the general audience in, say, the 18th or 19th century are super unknown today. Because they're not necessarily the ones who are in museums, they're not in collections that anyone goes to. And I think it's as I said before, a very changeable thing. Certain issues become important now. So this social engagement that I've been talking about is going to mean that those kind of artists from history also come up to the surface. And I think depending on when you studied and where you studied it, it's always going to be different. For the second question, in terms of artists and their relation to it, I was also at art school briefly, and when I was there in the sort of 90s, art history started in 1960, and before that I was just a big blank. So I think in some ways it's not important, but I think as an artist, as I said before, nothing comes from nothing, and you're always immediately when you make something engaging with a history, whether you like it or not. I don't think you have a choice about that. But you can maybe choose to ignore some things. There's a long history of fiction writers who don't read other people's writing, but they're still part of these traditions, and whether they like it or not, they're incorporated into history by other people. So I think this is one of the things you don't necessarily have agency as an artist with.
I can't really answer to your question, but there are many kinds of histories. The art history is one of the histories, right? So by learning about art history, so as learning about the history of the country, I think it helps artists' ideas, development, so they can develop their ideas, in a different way by learning, what the history is. Especially art histories. So I don't know. I'm not really. I don't have the answer to your question, but
I think also that if you look at it, say in the case of China, where history in general and art history in particular is about generations. There's this generation, that generation, and increasingly because of the contemporary being what it is right up to now, a generation is a smaller and smaller, before it would have been hundreds of years with an imperial generation. Now it's about 5 or 10, and every time I'm in China, I work closely with artists like Liam Gillick on the curatorial side. I have to explain to them why I'm working with my dad, even though he's just 10 years older, because that kind of art history antagonizes older generations to suppress younger generations and younger generations to rebel against older generations. So I think in those kind of contexts, art history plays a very different role.
Yeah, thank you very much. And from my viewpoint, that probably the influential collector like Obayashi-san and the very impactful the critic like you may make the history of the artist. Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much for your comments.
I should say that's what our marketing people say, but I'm not sure it's quite true. Are there any other questions from the audience?
Thank you. A question for Mr. Obayashi. You mentioned how important it is to promote Japanese artists in Japan and outside of Japan. And what is your expectation from media on that side? How do you see the role of media to, make contemporary art more accessible, basically to evangelize or to make people more interested, and also to support Japanese artists? And then, what kind of media? You said you were interested in the market, also following the market. So what kind of media, in addition to ArtReview, what kind of media do you read, and is it always in English, or do you have some interesting read also in Japanese language?
I think media can do so many things, if they want to. So, especially Japanese media should send more information, art information, what's happening in Japan to abroad, and maybe together with the Gaimusho, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I don't know, but there are so many opportunities for them to do that. But I don't know how much information the international art lovers can get, outside of Japan. But what do you think? Very little?
Well, I work in media, so I'm a little bit biased, but there is a lot of really interesting media outside of Japan. And I wonder in Japanese language, because I think people in Japan, even if they speak in English, they always enjoy, reading in their own language. So I see quite limitation. I see there is not so much, content available in Japanese language. So probably people like you, very knowledgeable, have to read in English and look for media outside of Japan, which is maybe.
But the international media are very much interested in the traditional Japanese cultures, so they really studied about kabuki or tea ceremony, Japanese traditional houses, etc. And then they explore those information to those their own countries, and we see very often those articles in international media. But why not Japanese contemporary arts? So they very much cover Japanese cuisines, but not much information about Japanese contemporary art scene. Why is it? As a gaijin,
let's work on that together. I'm very interested.
Well, I think from the media perspective, I launched ArtReview Asia in 2013, and not everything's in English. We ran a translation program for the last 10 years, which is about working with writers who don't write in English, and we translate them. And we find sometimes it's impossible, that you have to expand, the sort of footnotes become unending to explain local references. We work with one writer who writes in Tamil, which is a very old language, very closely associated with religion. And if you swear in Tamil, it's really obvious because it's a modern word and a really powerful thing. You translate it to English and it's just normal. It's not a powerful thing. So there's lots of issues like that. But we also, we launched a magazine in Mandarin last week. And we publish texts in German within the international edition and other languages. So I think sometimes you also have to refuse to translate stuff and say, if you're really interested, we think it's important, but you're going to have to do some research to work it out. But I'd also say, like, I had an experience when I was much younger writing for an international newspaper about art, and the editor sat me down and he said, you're in the culture department. There's two types of culture. There's popular culture, which is pop music, which is theatre, and bizarrely opera. But you don't work in that department. You work in the unpopular culture department, which is where art sits. And I think it's all to do with exposing people to the art itself, as much as the media can only do so much. I think unless people can go and see the art, then it becomes problematic. And I think it's more about making these things in public artworks, public exhibitions, but also doing projects. You know, when I spoke to Theaster Gates after Aichi, and I asked him which artists he was interested in at the moment, they were all Japanese. And I think it's also the experiences of artists and critics visiting places that then inspires you to find out more about them, in a way like the collecting problem. I think we've got time for one more question, if there is one.
I have a question for Mr. Obayashi. As a mega collector, do you think gallery program is quite important? Because there are so many upcoming galleries and there's so many galleries here now, but there are so many galleries here and upcoming galleries as well. So do you think gallery program is important when you do collect an artwork, or does that not matter? Because I think for you it's much more easier to acquire as a mega collector. It's much more easier for you to collect. So does that matter?
I think the programs of Japanese galleries are already very good. I'm very much satisfied with those programs, and I think very high standard, most of them. But what I was trying to say is they should try harder to introduce those artists to global market, and the artists also want to be introduced internationally. So I think that's more important. Yeah.
Does that also change where you collect? Do you ever see gallery programs and collect, or does that really not matter when you comes to your collection?
It doesn't matter for me anyway.
I think there was one other question at the end, so we could just squeeze that one in.
Hi, my name is Tony. I am a collector from Taiwan. And as Mr. Obayashi mentioned, that not every museum exhibition goes right every time. I mean, when the artists become more popular and you are sure you have a good eye, but if something goes wrong, will it change your point of view about the artist or about the artwork you collected?
Actually, it doesn't make any difference. For my collection, or for myself.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the great conversation.
So maybe I'll end on one last question, inspired by the audience questions, which was, when did you first become a mega collector? Can you remember when that happened?
I still don't think I'm a mega collector.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank you for it's been a really entertaining discussion. Thank you all for coming.
Let me answer one thing. I think keep on collecting is very important. So like for artists, maybe keep on working. For gallery, keep on just working. Just so I hope this art fair can they can continue running
No, exactly.
forever. So continuity is the most important thing for anything.
Thank you.
はい、大林武雄さん、マークラ